Here we are going to start. There we go. Again, welcome to the FY23 Impact Grants presentation. We're going to go ahead and get started. So here we go. If I am clicked on the right thing. There we go. Okay, so again, we've gone over a little bit of this. This presentation is being recorded. A copy of the slides and a copy of the presentation will be available afterwards. All participants are going to be starting on mute, but questions are encouraged. So please feel free to take yourself off of mute at any time. But we do appreciate you starting on mute. This presentation today is only going to cover our FY23 impact grants. So if you have questions about any of the other grant cycles, please let us know. We'll be happy to talk you through those as well. So first and foremost, for those of you who may not be familiar with us, we are the Community Foundation of Frederick County. Through what we do at the Community Foundation, we are a nonprofit philanthropic organization, meaning we both collect dollars and we hand out dollars. And so we work with individual donors, connecting them with causes that matter. And through the work that we do, we give out grants and scholarships to individuals and to local nonprofits. Our goal is to create a positive and lasting impact in the Frederick County community. So what we're really interested in is our impact grant cycle. So first, here's some threshold things that need to be discussed. The only eligible activities that we would like to see are services that are focused on Frederick County, that also provide direct benefits to Frederick County. That being said, there are a couple of funds that are available on our impact grant cycle that are intended to serve larger groups outside of just Frederick County. It'll be a Maryland-wide or several county-wide initiative rather than just in Frederick County. So unless there will be a list of available funds, and unless it's otherwise noted, the services have to be restricted to Frederick County. You don't have to be an organization that is headquartered in Frederick County, but the services need to be provided in Frederick County. So we also have eligible organizations. Most of our grants go to 501c3s that are in good standing. However, we will work with civic organizations that are working on a charitable project, religious organizations doing non-sectarian project, and we also work with quasi-governmental and governmental agencies on some of their projects that they're working on. So I want to talk a little bit about, for our 501c3s, there are some specific criteria that you need to meet in order to be eligible. And these are regulations that surround the 501c3 community. There are a few extra hoops, but these are things that you should be doing anyway, so hopefully everyone's in compliance. First of all, you need to have submitted your 990s and registered with the IRS as required. So we will be checking to make sure that your 501c3 status has not been revoked. We happen to use guidestar.org as our database to search for those that particular information. There are also two state of Maryland regulations that you need to be aware of. The Maryland Secretary of State has a requirement. It's called the Solicitations Act, where all organizations that are asking for money within Frederick or within the state of Maryland need to be registered as a charity with the Secretary of State. So if you are not currently registered for that, you will need to make sure that you are registered and cleared before the end of the grant application cycle. And you have to make sure that you're in compliance, because you need to submit an annual report for that to maintain your registration. There's also the Department of Assessment and Taxation's Maryland Personal Property Tax Division. Each of you, in order to have incorporated as a nonprofit organization, had to have gone through a process of incorporating in the state of Maryland before you even went to the IRS for your nonprofit status with the Department of Assessment and Taxation. So that's when you filed to become a business within the state of Maryland. Please make sure that you're current on your annual reports that need to be submitted to the Personal Property Tax Division. If you don't maintain that information, then you have the possibility of getting your status revoked in the state of Maryland, and that is a more complicated process to get reinstated. You can forfeit your status to do business in Maryland if you don't stay current with those particular filings. So please make sure you check those before you submit your application. So here's more of a general overview of what the impact grants can encompass. So the funding priorities and maximum grant request varies per fund. And we'll look a little bit at what a fund description looks like so you understand how to get that information. The minimum grant request is $500. There are going to be funds that have less than $1,000 available. And when that's the case, please request the entire amount of the grant or the fund. We can't split $800 between two organizations because our minimum grant is $500. So anything under $1,000 we can't split. So just ask for the whole thing, and that is fine. It should be noted that multiple applications are accepted. And this could be multiple applications for a single program that you want to spread out through a couple of different funds, or it could be for different projects within the same organization. So either one of those scenarios is okay. So another important thing to note is that we have the website that you're going to want to go to first to get to the application is frederickcountygives.org/grants. So I know I'm talking pretty quickly.
Diana, a question came up in chat. Do you want me to ask the questions as they come up?
Yes.
Or do you want me to hold them to the end? So Carolyn asked, do you need to be current with GuideStar?
So Carolyn, that's a great question. And no, you don't have to touch GuideStar at all. GuideStar has a relationship with the IRS where they're able to process information from the IRS about which organizations are current with their filings and which ones aren't. Just for your information, the 990s that you submit to the IRS are also posted on GuideStar. So that information is available publicly, but it will also give you information about the date that an organization was granted status by 501c3 status by the IRS, the standing that you have with the IRS, and you'll have your 990s available online. So great question. Any other questions right now? But Carolyn, you don't have to do anything with GuideStar. It just happens automatically.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great.
So we'll go ahead and move on. Oh, missed one. So here are the dates that you're going to be aware of for the impact grants. Our application opens August 15th and it closes September 15th. You will know if you've been awarded a grant by the beginning of November of this same year. So you're able to spend those dollars between January 1st of 2023 and December 31st of 2023. So you apply now, you'll know in November, and the money will come to you in January. So there are also some reporting deadlines that you need to be aware of. We have a very brief interim report that you fill out in by the end of July, just to let us know how you're doing, if you're running into any complications, that sort of thing. It is a report if it takes you longer than 10 minutes, then something's wrong and you need to call us because you might need help just understanding one of the questions. There is a more in-depth final report that will be due January 31st of 2024, which is a month after the spending period closes. We know a lot of our programs spend their impact grants prior to December 31st. So we do try and have the final report available as early as possible, just so you can get it out of the way and not have to worry about it later. So any questions about the dates? So in order to decide what you're going to apply to, you're going to choose an application, or you're going to choose a fund from our impact grant funds list. There's going to be a drop down within the application, or you can choose which one of those funds you want to apply to. And again, we'll go into what those descriptions look like, because there will be a list available that actually describes the criteria for each of the funds. And that will be hyperlinked within the application, but it'll also be available on our website. And within those, within the application, you're also going to need to select if you're going to be applying as a project or to support your project or support an individual. And we're going to get into that a little bit more.
Okay, good.
Okay, so this is what one of the listings looks like for a fund in the available funds list. So, and some of the important information is highlighted. So there's going to be a name of the fund. And so when you go into the application, if this is the fund that you want to apply to, you're going to select the Sharon I. Hooper Fund for Children, or whatever the name of the fund is. You're also going to see a number over here, and this is the total amount of money that's available in that particular fund for this year. So if you see this amount of money, oh, sorry, I keep clicking on things. So if you see this amount of money, the $15,075, please don't apply for $20,000 from this fund. So you cannot receive any additional dollars from this fund other than $15,075. So this is an important piece of information to make note of. Again, if you have a program that needs $20,000, you can apply under the Hooper Fund and then other funds that also support programs for kids. So again, multiple applications are accepted. And you're going to see here that this particular fund can either be used for program support, that's what the P means, or for individual support. And so that's what the IN means. So program, individual. And we'll look a little bit more deeply into program versus individual in a second. But the other things that are important to note is that this fund is set up to support programs serving youth. So that's the big umbrella that they want to support. Some funds will end at that they want to support programs with youth, or they want to support the arts, or they want to support historic preservation. And that's the sum total of the criteria that they use. However, there are going to be lots of funds that have a preference. And in this particular fund's case, the preference is for services to families with children with catastrophic illnesses. So that's what their preference is. So at the end of the application period, if there are applications to this fund that have services for families with children with catastrophic illness, then we will consider those applications first. If there's money left over after the application closes, then we'll also consider programs serving youth in general. So for this particular fund, we have funded both families with children with catastrophic illnesses, but we've also just served general programs serving youth that have other particular needs. So we do have much larger funds than the Sharon Hooper Fund that address families with children with catastrophic illnesses. So we don't always get a lot of applications for catastrophic illness within this fund. So it's something to consider if you're just looking for programs that help support families or help to support programs serving youth. Any questions?
Yeah,
Yes.
Diana, there's two questions in chat. The first one is from Teresa Donnelly. Where can we see the fund list?
So the fund list will be hyperlinked within the application itself, and it will also be posted on our website. So, and Mark, have you, do we have a hyperlink from Lena yet for the list?
We do, yes.
If you want to go ahead and put that in the chat, and this is a link that will let you look at the list. Again, nothing will be available to apply to until August 15th, but the list we have finalized the list finally, and now that information is available. And so Mark's going to go ahead and put that link in the chat when he has a chance.
Yep. And the second question comes from Melissa Muntz. Is partial funding of a request a possibility within an individual fund?
Yes. So the Community Foundation, for all of our grant applications or all of our grant processes, Impact, Strategic, Women's Giving Circle, any of those, we will consider partial funding. So it's not an all or nothing thing. However, we do try to concentrate funding. We realize that you wouldn't have asked for $15,000 if you didn't need $15,000. So it's a $15,000 grant ask, and we only have, and after applications are considered, there's only $2,000 left. We may or may not give you that $2,000. It really just depends on the nature of their request. But yes, partial funding is possible, and if you're submitting multiple applications, there may be partial funding from each of those funds that you ask for. So, and last thing to note about the grant funds list. There are times when we get a lot of applications for specific funds, but none or few applications for other funds. And so if we're at a point where the grants committee really wants to fund your project, but it wasn't, we weren't able to do that through the fund that you applied for, we may play matchmaker and consider your application under a different fund than what you signed up for. So it doesn't happen frequently, but it does happen just about every year. So that might be something that to be aware of, that the fund you applied for may not be the fund that we give you money from, but we'll let you know when that happens. So, and I see that Mark has dropped the link for the available funds list in the chat. So please feel free to take a look at it whenever you'd like. I will not be offended if you peruse that while we are on this call together. So any other questions at this particular moment? No? Okay. So now we're going to talk about project support or individual support. So the question on the application specifically asks, please select whether your application is in support of a project or in support of an identified individual or household. And you're going to have to answer one way or the other. So project support application or individual support application. So, and let me give you an example of what that might look like. The project support example, I'm going to read it just in case there's anybody out there that can't read this particular slide on the device they're using for the call. Our organization provides housing stability support services. Each year, 15% of our clients indicate that a catastrophic illness has destabilized their finances and threatens their ability to maintain housing. We are asking for funds to pay for rent, food, transportation, and/or medical expenses for households dealing with catastrophic illness. So this is an organization that provides housing stability support, and they know moving forward that they're going to have clients that get destabilized by catastrophic illness, but they don't know who those clients are at this precise moment. They're not going to be able to say that this is going to support family A and individual B from this fund. They just want the dollars available so they can support the families or the households as they are made aware of them throughout the program year. Does that make sense? I'm not hearing any questions.
There are other questions though, Diana. One is from TJ. Are there any specific priority areas for FY23, or are they specific to each fund?
They are specific to each fund, and that is a great question. So our strategic grants are where we have selected priorities that get funded each year. Within the impact grants, the priority is based on the criteria of the fund. And so again, it's a wide range of things, but your program just has to fit within the criteria of the fund, and it is individual to each fund.
Thank you. And then another question from Patricia. If my organization is not on the list, does that mean that I am not eligible for the grant?
So no, okay, hold on. The available funds list is just the funds that we hold within the community foundation that then we distribute money out of. So your name doesn't need to be, the name of your organization doesn't need to be under any of those funds or on that list at all. There are occasionally funds that have preferences for specific organizations. One I can think of is there's a preference for Waste Station in one of the lists or in one of the funds. And again, this is a preference. So the fund supports a broad umbrella of services, but if Waste Station comes in with a funding request, that application will be requested first, or that application will be considered first. If there's money left over after their request has been funded to the extent that the grants committee wants to fund them, that means then that the other applicants that apply to that particular fund will be considered. So if you see a name that's under a fund, it's not a restriction against anybody else applying for it. Otherwise, it'd just be a designated fund and we'd send the money directly to that organization. It's just a preference. And so please feel free to apply to it, because we don't know in advance whether or not that organization that is listed as a preference is going to apply. Does that answer your question, or did I just muddy the waters? Okay, I'm not hearing any further questions on that point, so I'm going to go ahead with a little bit more information about our project applications. So when you select that you're going to be doing a project support application, you're going to need to explain how the project fits the fund purpose, which is a little bit about what we were just talking about. So if you're doing an historic preservation project, please don't apply for youth funds or funds that are supporting youth programs and vice versa, because you're going to need to be able to justify how what you're doing, what you're proposing to do fits the criteria of the fund. You're going to have to explain the specific impact that the project or program will have. And so by doing X services or providing or buying X equipment or providing Y opportunity, then we think that the impact in Frederick County will be this, or the impact to our program or organization will be ABC. And then you're going to actually have to give us information about the activities that you're going to do. So you're going to be providing case management services, and in that particular instance, that means meeting with clients at least once a week and creating goals with them, and like what are the widgets that you're doing to make your impact possible. Any questions about that particular description?
Diana, there is another question that came in from Jonathan.
Okay.
If a grant application is rejected, is there a time period for appeal? If so, does your organization provide reasoning for the rejection so that changes can be made?
So first part of that project, or first part of that question, there isn't an appeal process that once we make those announcements, our decisions are final, and it's not, never fear, it's not me making the decision about whether or not you get funded. We have a grants committee that will be reviewing all of the applications and making decisions together about what will or will not be funded. If your project gets denied, we're happy to take questions. We don't proactively give information to the rejected projects, partially because we receive over 100 applications during our impact grant process. And there are but 3 of us within our department, and we would not be able to provide information in a timely manner to those organizations that did those proposals that did get rejected. But we're happy to work with you to talk about why your specific application may have been rejected this year. But we do ask that you contact us if you're interested in that information.
All right, thanks, Diana. 2 more questions, one from Valerie. Can a current program be considered if it is an expansion or increase of services?
So current programs, even as is, can be considered. These don't have to be new projects. It doesn't have to be an expansion. It doesn't have to be an increase. It can be you're looking for funding for a project as is, or you're looking, but again, all of those things are also eligible. So if you want to start a new project, that's an eligible application. If you want to increase your services, that's eligible. If you need an investment to help refocus your services, or any of those things are available. So status quo or any changes that you want to make.
All right, thanks, Diana. Both Jonathan and Valerie said thank you for the answers, and we have one more from TJ. Is there a scoring criteria?
So yes, there's a scoring criteria. There is a part of the evaluation that provides a score, and then there's also a subjective part of the application or the review process that the grants committee members will be completing. So there's a little bit of both, and all decisions that we make on that the grants committee makes include consideration of both the total score that the organization has, as well as any of the subjective criteria. And I'm afraid that I don't have the scoring criteria in front of me, So I can't tell you what that is right now, but if you want to contact me afterwards, I'd be happy to share. Okay, so we're going to go on to talk about individual support. So if you select that individual support application, this is the type of thing that you would be asking for. So our organization provides housing stability support services. So again, same type of organization, but this time Sarah S. and her 4 children recently graduated from our transitional housing program into permanent housing of their own. One of Sarah's children has since been diagnosed with leukemia. Because of lost work hours for Sarah and mounting medical expenses for her child, Sarah may lose her current housing. We are asking for funds to pay for rent, food, transportation, and related medical expenses for Sarah and her family. So this is where you as an organization know this family and know their needs, and you are applying on their behalf. So we don't have any way for individual households to apply to the Community Foundation directly, because we as a Community Foundation don't have a vetting process for those particular requests. We don't have a chance to look at income. We don't have a chance to get to know the families. We don't have a chance to do all of those things, and those are not our areas of expertise. You don't want us making decisions about who is or is not eligible, because we just don't have the time and the expertise to make great decisions. But you as nonprofit or quasi-governmental or governmental organizations or any of those eligible organizations, if you're working with a family and you know that they have particular needs, any of those funds that have the IN after it, you can apply on their behalf during the impact grant cycle. And any funds that we don't spend or are not awarded during our impact grant cycle will be available on our rolling grant cycle, which is exactly the same application. So anything that I've said here about our impact grants is applicable to our rolling grant process. And the rolling grants are open between November 1st and May 1st, and your applications are considered as they are received. So there could be, because we know not everybody has their crisis in August that will allow you to fund them individually. So if you have needs during the course of the year for individual families, there's usually dollars available on our rolling grants for those particular needs. So any questions right now? Okay. So for the individual support application, you're going to need to describe how the individual or household meets the fund criteria. Because if you look at the criteria, there are some criteria that are just focused on kids. There are some that are just on adults. There are some that specify cancer or catastrophic illness. There's one that supports folks with diabetes or heart disease. And so you're going to have to make sure that whoever you're asking on behalf of meets the criteria of the fund. And you have to be able to explain how you selected this individual or household for support. So what was the process your organization went through to say, yes, we recommend this person for support? And then there's also going to be a section where you're going to need to provide documentation of expenses. So we know that the expenses you're asking for are real. In the case of if you're asking for support for rent, the first page of the rental agreement is fine. If you're asking for support for food, then you could provide a written statement from the organization knowing, this is the size of the family and this is how much they typically spend on groceries each month. And so we're asking for money for that. So they're depending on what you would like to spend the money on may depend on the documentation that you attach. I will say that all of the documentation needs to be scanned into a single PDF document and uploaded. And so there isn't a place to do multiple uploads. You have to upload it all together. And so if any organization has issues with scanning, just let us know and we'll help hook you up with that. So, okay, before we move on to other things that you need to know about the application, are there any other questions right now? No? Okay. So all applications, whether you're doing program or individual support, have to include a project or program budget and information about your organization as a whole. So audits, financial reviews, or statement of financial activities. And so you can think of it, and we need both pieces of this information. So your project or program budget is projecting forward. So what's going to happen during the grant period that you want to spend money on. The information about the organization as a whole is actually taking a look back in time at your organization and what your financial activities were up to that led up to where you're at right now. And part of that is just to make sure that there's some financial stability going on, or that this is a reasonable ask from within the budget of the whole organization. This is not to say that for new organizations that are just starting out, we know your budgets are, or we know your statement of financial activities can be kind of erratic because funding is erratic at that particular stage, or that if you have a super large organization that you won't be considered for funding. It's just another piece of information that our grants committee can use to make the best decisions possible around our grants. So again, there are going to be two pieces of information, projecting forward and looking back. Specific for looking forward, we are going to want to know, so on a couple of next slides, we're going to be looking at a budget example of what it could look like, but use the budget, please use the budget format that works for your particular organizations. Don't try and fit into the structure that we have as an example. If it includes all of this information, use that. Use your organization's budget format. But we do need to have information about any of the income that you're expecting to come in to support this project or program. We need to know your expenditures by category or line item. We need any vendor quotes. It's actually a separate upload if it's applicable to your organization. And yes, price descriptions from Amazon can be included as a quote depending on what the purchase is. Like if you're purchasing a laptop, that's a quote. If you're getting your roof done for your organization, Amazon would not be sufficient. There are some things that we will not pay for, and so these are non-cash expenses like in-kind sorts of stuff and unrelated operating expenses. So if you're applying for a youth program and you're an organization that serves youth and seniors and I don't know, bowling balls for another example, and you were approved for a youth services grant, you could only use those dollars on the youth services grant or the youth services programs. You couldn't serve seniors or your bowling balls outside with the money that we give you for your youth services. And again, things like depreciation, so those non-cash expenses are going to be things that we don't fund. So I will tell you that our grants committee members do take a good look at your project or program budget. And so this is going to be something that the more detail you provide, the better it is, because it helps tell your story. And it's just in numbers instead of in words. So let's look at what all of that looks like. So these are some tips both for the information provided that you're going to want to include. So whatever format you use, it would be awesome if you included the name of your organization and the name of the project that you're applying for. So when our grants committee members look at your application online, if they want to look at your budget closely, they will have to open it as a separate document. And if they're looking at a number of different applications altogether, having that information that this particular spreadsheet or this particular document is associated with that particular organization, with that particular project, that would be fantastic. That really just helps them out and keeps things straight. So for your budget, you want to indicate what the start and end dates are for the budget. So it could be the program period, or it could be the entire grants period. You could know that you are completing this particular project within the first 3 months of the grants period or the last 3 months of the grants period. So you could only do a sample budget for that particular, you could submit a budget that is just for that particular time frame when you know you're going to be using the funds. And so when you list out your income or your revenue, you're going to want to, again, more detail the better. So line items are great. Again, these are all just examples of things that you may have as sources of income for your organization. And then there's also this information about whether it's pending or awarded, or if it's available as needed.
And Diana, TJ has a question in regards to matching.
Sure.
If the funding will be used for a match portion of an already existing grant, should we provide full program budget?
Yes, please. So any other questions right now about the income part of the budget? Okay, so now we're going to look at expenses. Again, by line item would be great. And tell us how you came to this particular amount of money. So, so you don't necessarily have to go into this amount of detail. Like if your needs assessment documentation included a consultant and staff time, then you would just say 20 hours of staff time, 20 hours of consultant hours. But again, the more information you provide, the better. So, and what these expenses may be will depend on what you're applying for. So it could be that you want to use the funds for a specific thing, like buying a computer. And so you may just have one expense line item that you want to buy this computer, and your income may be two lines. It's, you know, community foundation grant and nonprofit to balance, and that is a reasonable budget for your particular ask. And then some of these budgets are going to be more complicated because you're asking for operating funds for a specific program, but there are lots of expenses and lots of income that are attached to that particular project. But please do note that it's okay to include staff hours in these, or to just ask simply for 4 staff hours. Those are okay expenses to include within these applications. Okay, and last but not least, we need to know your net project income or deficit. And if there is a deficit, or we would like an explanation on where you think you're going to make the deficit up from. And then if there's a projected surplus, also explain what's going to happen, like what are you going to use the surplus for, or how are you going to make up for a deficit? So any question about a budget? Okay, one more thing I do want to add about budgets. So we talk about project and program budgets, but it can also be organizational budgets. So if your organization does one thing and you want money to do that one thing, then you may not have a separate budget for how our dollars are going to be used. It may just be for general operating funds for your whole organization. And in that case, it's okay to submit an organization budget because that is what you're trying to fund, is that entire organizational structure. And or if you just want to fund even a piece of that particular organization, but your organization only does this one thing, then it's okay to submit an organizational budget as your budget. So any questions about budgets right now? Then we're going to move on. Now we're going to talk about the financial information that's required for your organization. And again, this is looking back. So we're going to be looking at your last finished fiscal year. So right now we're in the middle of different fiscal years. So we would want the one that was completed last. So we need a full year's worth of information. So for organizations that have less than $300,000 in charitable contributions, then we have a financial form that we developed at the Community Foundation that we would like you to fill out, and that's going to be linked within the application. And it's going to ask for some basic information about assets and liabilities and that sort of thing. If your organization has over $300,000 in contributions, but less than $750,000, we need you to have submitted a financial review. And this is where an independent CPA comes in and takes a look at your books, and but it's more of a reconciliation of the does the accounting look like it fits within general accounting standards? And does it look like it's an accurate representation of the costs and expenses, or the expenses and the income that this organization was working with over a specified period of time? If your organization receives over $750,000 in contributions, you will be required to complete a financial audit. Most organizations with budgets of that size already do that. And so please know that that's just, and a financial audit just goes into a much deeper dive and looks at supporting documentation and other things to make sure that you are up to standard with the managing of your dollars. Excuse me. One thing I will note is we do not want your 990. So that is information we already have through GuideStar. We need this financial information. So it contains different information than your 990. And it also is information that is generally reviewed by an outside CPA or an outside CPA firm. So we need to have information that is coming from an independent reviewer of your books, with the exception of this one. But we can, if you have questions about that, please let me know. So any questions about that? Again, we used to do reimbursement requests for our grants. This year, again, we're doing upfront payments. So if you are awarded a grant, you will receive a check from us either in January or February. So you don't have to worry about any of the information on this slide. So again, if you're awarded a grant, it will be dispersed within the first 2 months of the program period. Unless we're paying vendors directly. So let's say, especially for those individual support applications, we can go ahead and pay the vendors directly. So the landlord, the hospital, the car company, the insurance company, those sorts of things. So we will, if within the individual application, you're requesting that we give the money to you, great, we will give the money to you. And you can disperse it on behalf of the family or the household yourself, or you can ask us to pay the vendors directly. A lot of our governmental and quasi-governmental organizations that apply on behalf of individual households ask us to pay the vendors directly, just because it's easier for them to process. But that is entirely up to you. So there will be financial reporting that will be necessary in a final report. We need you to include a profit and loss statement for the project and a statement of financial position for the organization. So those are two different statements. And if you don't know what those are, then let us know and we can help make sure you understand that reporting requirement. At this time, there's no proof of payment or proof of receipt that will be required at the time of reporting. We do reserve the right to request proof of expenditures if we feel something needs further explanation according to the standards of our Board of Trustees. The grantee will be responsible for returning any unused funding at the end of the program period. Do note that if it's $10, we don't want your $10 back, but we're talking about a substantial amount of money based on the size of the grant that has remained unused. If you have questions about if the amount of money you have left is below that mark, please let us know, because it will really depend on the size of the grant. Also know that it's possible to request a variance. So let's say you need another 2 months to fully spend the grant, then you will need to come to us and ask for a variance. But we need to know that by September. So several months before the end of the grant period, because you can ask me and I can say whatever I want, but we'll need to get the request approved by our Board of Trustees in order to make it a legal part of the grant spending that you have.
And Diana, there was a question that popped up from Mandy. Do you mean revenue or charitable contributions? And what are your expectations when an organization has multiple sources of revenue?
Mandy, can you, if you can, could you go off mute and explain that a little more?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I struggle with this sometimes because, we have, our stores, right? We have two retail stores that help us to provide resources to our programs. So when I submit a financial report or I submit an audit or financial statement, it includes to all of our resources. So, which then has sometimes a misrepresentation, because when you're saying charitable contributions, then you're only saying what is donor designated or restricted for specific things. So how would you want me to represent that? Do I need to separate it out, make a special, a specific budget? How do you want me to represent that? Because just given these different, financial requirements doesn't give a true picture of what you're asking for.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to a couple of things here. So Mandy,
Sorry,
I'm assuming, and this is Mandy from Partners in Care, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so just want to make sure I have the right Mandy. I'm assuming your organization has annual charitable contributions that are over $750,000 that you're doing an financial audit on an annual basis.
So we have revenue over that amount.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, and if I'm remembering your sources of income correctly, you're kind of required to do this financial audit regardless.
Correct. Yep.
Correct. Okay, so please do, for the organizational financial information, please do submit the financial audit.
Okay.
So, and we have grants committee members, several of whom are CPAs who can read a financial audit and understand it and help other grants committee members understand it who may not be as fiscally aware. So the fact that you're receiving money through retail stores to support your programs is actually a great area for diversity of income sources. So it wouldn't be a ding on your, and we also understand that Partners in Care operates in multiple counties. So what we're seeing in the financial audit is not just limited to whatever programs you're asking for in support of what's going on in Frederick County. In terms of the budget, if you're going to be any of the income coming in from the retail stores is going to be used to support the particular project, then that would have to be listed as income here. Or it could just be, if the money from the retail stores goes into a pool that is used as needed by the various programs, you can list it in something like nonprofit to balance. So this is funds that the nonprofit has that can be used to support the program. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. But so one other thing. So here's what I always struggle with as well is because our Frederick site and our Frederick location is, and we hope one day will be financially sustainable and able to, our store will help and all of our funding will help to support the Frederick County residents, right?
Sure.
In the meantime, our headquarters help support that while we don't have, while we're not able to meet the demand, right? So when I'm presenting a budget, should I just be, and the budget for the project, should I just be representing Frederick? Because that's what it technically should be, right? So anything that comes in from Frederick stays in Frederick. The benefit to Frederick and their community is we have a headquarters in Anne Arundel County that makes money that helps support Frederick right now.
Right, and that would be that nonprofit to balance or headquarters to balance. Any dollars that are used to support that particular program, wherever it comes from, whether it's from headquarters or within Frederick County or, from proceeds from an endowed fund that's held with somebody else, whatever those sources of income are, please do include them in your budget.
Okay. Great. Okay. I just sometimes we get hurt, when we're applying for funds in Frederick or, in different grants, wherever, because our income and our overall revenue is, puts us out of that ballpark. However, the program within the county that we're requesting funds from is in the hole, you know what I mean? And it's desperate, but, because it has the organizational structure over it, protecting it, we get we get dinged for it, and sometimes we aren't eligible to apply, and that's always my struggle.
Okay, yes, that would not be something that would give you a ding in this particular application process. So
Okay.
that's not something, because you're going to get the money the way you need to get your money for programs that operate in Frederick County. And again, for these grants, the organization doesn't have to be headquartered in Frederick County in order to be eligible. So if you're using money across the total organization to support your programs in Frederick County, that would be totally fine.
Great. Thank you so much. Sorry for taking everybody else's time. Thanks.
No, those are great questions, and every organization has some complications to it, so we're happy to answer those questions now. So, and actually that leads us to our last slide. Does anybody have any questions right now that you would like answered? Trust me, if you have them, other people in will also have them. You will note on this particular slide that there's contact information for folks within our organization. Most of your questions will be answered by either myself or Mark, who's been chiming in with questions from the chat. But Sonia is also available, and Martin is also sometimes available. He just works part-time with us. So I'm going to stop sharing right now. And anything else folks would like to know? Any questions you have, any concerns? Any clarifications? So, and I know I see a lot of people that I'm already familiar with, and I'm also seeing a lot of new faces. So if anyone has any questions about how to sign into the grants management system that we have, or how to create a profile for your organization, we'd be happy to help you. And specifically, Mark would be happy to help you. He is our current guru in our online grants management system, so he can work with you if you have those particular needs right now. So if no one has any other questions, and yes, the recording session will be shared so you can refer back to it. And thanks, Mandy. We're glad that this presentation, we hope it was helpful. Glad it was helpful for you, and hope it was helpful for other folks. And we look forward to answering your questions once you get into the application and take a look at those funds that are available. So, all right, no more questions in the chat. So thank you very much for being here. I'm glad you could be here and that you took the time to be here, and we'll talk with you soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.